So here I am again, Simon Jacobson, welcome, Wednesday Night Live. The class is dedicated to Arik and Aurelia Xander, and it's titled, What is the Greatest Step Ever Taken? It's a good question. You know, any of you who have children know that maybe the greatest step is when a child takes its first step. Neil Armstrong, 45 years ago, when man landed on the moon for the first time, Neil Armstrong was the person who actually stepped on the moon. And he famously said, in the words that were beamed all over the universe, all over the world, that one small step for mankind, one large leap, one small step for man, one large leap for mankind. It's a very nice line. The question is, was it actually fulfilled? We're 45 years later. Was there a large leap of mankind? Do we have less misery? You know, we have definitely more technology. Is the world a better place since it was in 1969? What I would like to suggest, pulling rank, is that the greatest step ever taken was taken 3,370 years ago by a man called Abraham, who we read about in this week's portion. And the step is called Lech Lecha. God says to Abraham, Lech Lecha, you shall travel unto you, take a step. And as we shall discuss, this step changed history. More than this walking on the moon, more than any other event. This was the first pioneering step that has changed the world as we know it. And the objective of this discussion here is to show how each of us can emulate our forefather Abraham and also take such steps. And everybody wants to know, what can I do to improve my life, to change my life? We're stuck in patterns, routines. We're stuck in our own mindsets, our fears, our insecurities. And the question is, how do you actually make a real move? We all know that New Year resolutions don't last too long. Many of our decisions and many of the things that we like to do, that we really set out, and then we get just step back, whether it's losing weight, whether it's finding a healthy relationship, whether it's changing jobs, whether it's making another type of move in our lives. We are weighed down by the baggage of our past. And the question is, how does one really free themselves? You know, the million-dollar question. And it all goes back to Abraham and his first step. So, though Neil Armstrong said what he said, and with all due respect to him, yes, it was a great achievement, a great technological, scientific achievement to be able to land man on the moon. But the end of the day is steps are all about what happens afterwards, the follow-up. And I don't know if the world, as I said, is a better place. So let's talk about Abraham's journey. Even though it happened thousands of years ago, it's as relevant today as ever. When Zhou Enlai became Prime Minister of China, so that was when Nixon was President of the United States in early 70s, and he was the first time China opened up to the Western world. So Western journalists had an opportunity to interview the Chinese. So one of them asked Zhou Enlai what his opinion is on the American Revolution, which of course is a major watershed moment in this country's history. And he dismissively and characteristically said, it's too early to tell. Because the American Revolution was around 250 years ago, 270 years ago, 1776, where are we now, 1976? Yeah, something like 250 years ago. And Chinese history goes back a few thousand years. So what's 250 years in the scheme of things? And it was a very appropriate answer, because even though 250 years is a long time for us, it's more than a lifetime, it's 2 lifetimes, 3 lifetimes. But nevertheless, it's short periods. And when you see something, you want to really know the longevity, continuity of something, you need to see it over time. I hear from people who do business in China that the Chinese don't respect anyone except Jews, simply because of their continuity, because we're here longer than they are. It's like, think of it from a business point of view. Any business that's lasted thousands of years, must have been doing something right. So the real secret to continuity, to longevity, to even eternity, would go back to what did Abraham do that still has such impact. You probably know that the biggest bestseller of all best-selling books does not hit any chart at all. It sells more than all the bestsellers combined every year, year after year consistently. That book is called the Bible. It'd be interesting if the New York Times would acknowledge that this is the biggest bestseller, at least as a footnote somewhere, but they don't even talk about it. There's back to the battle between religion and science or whatever it may be. And Abraham is arguably the most influential figure in history because today 4 billion people on earth, minimal 4 billion, maybe more, see Abraham as the pioneer of faith. The 2.5 billion Christians and 1.5 billion Muslims, Abraham is the first prophet, he's the first founder of monotheism. You could arguably even say that the Eastern world, with Buddhism, there are many references in Buddhism to Brahmin and Abrahamic ideas, but 4 billion people is a lot of people. More than Facebook. Facebook is now a fifth of the world's population. I think it just hit 1.4 billion. Okay, pretty quickly, you can say. And Abraham has influenced 4 billion. And of course, if it's 4 billion, we know it's a critical mass, which means the rest of the world. So what exactly did this man do, who we call our great patriarch, our great forefather? A single man in the Mesopotamian valley, in what is today modern-day southeast Iraq, which is interestingly still in the center of news. And then he took a journey, which begins when he was 75 years old. Took a journey, went northwest, and ended up what was called then Canaan, the land of Canaan, which would later become known as Israel. All a part of the geography that still, in a far disproportionate way, dominates headlines. So it's not, you start thinking about it, it's not some type of event from back then, some ancient civilization. It's still the center of headlines and still a hotbed and a breeding ground of most of the challenges and troubles of this world. Thousands of years later. And it surprises me that so few scholars really focus on this. Everybody's analyzing and trying to analyze the geopolitical, the clash of civilizations, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, fights over Jerusalem. All you simply have to do is just trace the steps to what the geography was going on thousands of years ago. And it's still similar battles. So understanding Abraham is not a small matter. It happens to be, can lie at the key to understanding and deciphering events of our time. I'm focusing a little more on a personal side, but it's equally important also the global side of it, the personal side of this journey. What is this Lech Lecha? It's interesting. So Abraham, if you read the narrative in the Bible, in the Torah, so the book of Genesis begins with the chapter Genesis, Bereshis. That talks about more or less the creation, Adam and Eve, the first 10 generations. The next chapter, which was last week, we read Noach, the story of the flood, covers the next 10 generations. And Abraham is the 20th generation from Adam. And the end of last week's chapter, we just read that he was born, but we read very little about him. His real life story begins, fascinatingly, at age 75. You need to go to the Medrash, to the oral interpretation, to know what happened to Abraham before he was 75. The way he grew up in an idol manufacturer's home, how he rebelled against the norms of society, how he became a believer and a person of faith, and finally how he embraced and began perpetuating and propagating a message of virtue, justice, charity, principles, mind you, that actually have not become institutionalized till 200-300 years ago. Because remember, before the United States of America, before the French Revolution, before modern Western society, the concept of the civil rights, that every individual is entitled to a certain amount of freedoms based on what the Declaration of Independence calls inalienable rights endowed to us by the Creator, all people are created equal, was not an institutional system anywhere in the world. Monarchs, the church, other despots, fascists, whatever they were, ruled the world, wherever it was. So it's interesting, it's only a few hundred years that the principles that Abraham taught thousands of years ago, that the Jews bore that torch and they carried it through generations, really became something that is today a viable system where most of the world, I can't say all the world, but most of the world, and it continues to spread, embraces these principles, at least in concept. So understanding Abraham lies at the heart, and as I said, is the key to understanding so much. But I can't focus on everything, so I want to focus on what exactly. So what's the first story about Abraham? You'd think you talk about his faith, you talk about his beliefs, about his morality, about his ethics, about his justice, integrity. No. The first story is in this week's chapter. Lech lecha. God says to him, leave ma'artzecha, your land, maladecha, your birthplace, beis avicha, the home of your parents, and go to the land that I will show you. This is the opening story of Abraham in the Bible and the Torah. What's the significance of this? A journey is just a journey. You'd want to know what was his destination? What happened when he got there? Which the story continues and talks about that. But why is this so significant that God told him to leave? As if this step that he took lies at the beginning of the whole journey and the whole pioneer and the whole revolution that Abraham would initiate. So it lies in the verse. When you read the verse properly, a few questions jump out at you. Usually when you give someone directions to go somewhere, you don't need to tell them about their departure point. They know where they are. You need to tell them and describe to them where they're going. Are they going north, south, east, west? What city? What country? What city? What street? Number, etc. Here, it seems reversed. When it comes to this destination, God just says a vague, go to the land that I will show you. In other words, embark on your mission, and I'll show you, at some point, I'll show you where you're going to end up going. When it comes to the departure point, God says, leave your land, leave your birthplace, leave your home of your parents, which technically is essentially redundant. I mean, it's not always redundant, but in case of Abraham, the home of his parents, the land, and his birthplace happened to all be in the same place. As I said, southeastern Iraq, the land of where he was born, or Kazdim. So why the need to repeat it three ways? Abraham knew where he was. God simply could say, wherever you are, I now command you, or I instruct you to go, as I said, south, north, east, northwest rather, to Israel, or to the land of Canaan. Every word in the Torah is precise, and this is not an accident. Clearly, no writer would write something like that. It would be the equivalent of what I would say to you. You ask me, I want to go somewhere, I'll say to you, okay, leave the place you're standing, the city you're in, the country you're in, and go to a place that I will show you. Like the directions. So as it's almost deliberately confusing if you think of it on an ostensible level. But in truth, God was actually telling Abraham, and in effect all of us, each one of us right here, whoever you may be, the secret to true movement. This wasn't just about a physical journey, you're living here, now go to the promised land. It was about a spiritual journey. It was about how a person grows, how a person moves in their lives. So the journey here is referring to the journey that each of us take in our own trajectory, in our own spiritual growth. The epiphanies, the awarenesses, the levels of higher levels of consciousness, whatever it is that defines our journey, is what God is telling. The secret to it is, even though you hear about this, Stephen Covey writes in the seven habits of highly effective people, that the secret is to keep your eyes on the destination. And you hear this in all Business 101, is you need to know your objectives, your goals. It's true. But that's true as far as so-called you get stronger. But children like that have far more confidence and ability to take risks. I'm simplifying it because it's a little more complicated than that. There are more factors, but these things are not small matters. So how do you bring up a child, or how do you bring up an adult that will be able to have a healthy balance of proper discretion, review and research, proper caution, and at the same time not allowing fear and insecurity to trap them from growing? That is an art. That's growing up in the right and healthy type of situation and environment. And that's what God tells Abraham. That the destination, discover who you really are, free yourself of the smokescreens, of the blocks and subjectivity that doesn't let you get to discover the real sense of self. I can tell you from my own experience, in life, especially communicating. One of the big challenge in speaking and teaching and writing is not even getting an idea across. That is obviously an obvious challenge. It's how do you diffuse built-in stereotypes and resistances in an audience that you're speaking to, and they're not telling you about those biases and prejudices. You know? I mean, since we have a little intimate crowd here, take yourselves as an example. Some of you I know more, some of you I know more than others. But everybody has biases and prejudices. Speak to an audience, some people just by looking at me with a beard and a yarmulke immediately are distrustful. Why? Because a guy that looked like me ripped them off in business. Or, as children, they had Hebrew school lessons that were completely irrelevant. And all the other biases or prejudices against religion. And many of them justified. When you start speaking about things that really matter, everybody has certain elements of resistance. Not everyone completely resists, but you never know. So part of communication, a big part, is not so much getting your point across, it's some way disarming and diffusing any resistance to hearing the message. Because if you go into a room and think of it this way, sure you've been in a situation where against your will or some whatever situation you got stuck, you suddenly have to hear somebody speak. And you look at the guy or the woman and you say, this is an arrogant person, I'm not interested. You have a completely, even before they open their mouth, you're just completely not receptive to anything they have to say. Right? Now this speaker doesn't know you feel that way. How could they win over your trust? They'd have to be wise enough to know how to diffuse it by saying something that will allow you to melt away or somewhat put aside your prejudices. This is exactly the same idea here with Abraham. It's not so much getting the message across, it's getting rid of the biases and the prejudices and the stereotypes that we carry within. And if you do that, then the door is open. You know, I like that line, I've repeated it many times. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. You hear someone that cares about you, it trumps all the knowledge of somebody that's a brilliant person that doesn't care. You can hear a brilliant professor speak and then you sense that they don't really care, they're indifferent and so on. There's a part of you that just is not going to be receptive. You hear someone that has empathy and care, they may not be so brilliant. They may not espouse, they may not be able to articulate such brilliant concepts, but there's a receptivity because you feel this person cares about me and my condition, my life, my situation. So this is an invisible element in communication that's very hard to quantify. It's hard to teach. You know, you hear a lot of communication, you're taught how to phrase an expression, how to influence people, how to persuade them, how to convince them, how to sell something. But to get rid of stereotypes is far more important and far more relevant because then you create an open channel. And interestingly, to get rid of stereotypes, there's no tricks. You can't fool somebody. You actually have to be able to neutralize a preconceived notion. So in a sense, when God says to Abraham, he doesn't tell him the destination. He says just vaguely, go to El Eretz Asher Areka, go to the land that I will show you. And when it comes to the departure point, he says, leave your land, your place of your birth, your land, the place of your birth, and the home of your parents, saying basically the secret to all freedom, to all journeys, and to communication as well, which is to somewhat neutralize, somewhat diffuse the forces, this inherent subjectivity, the parental influences, and the cultural, social pressure that each of us impacts us. And when you're able to do that to some extent, you start suddenly discovering what emerges is the real you. What you're like without other forces shaping you. And many people wonder, what would I be like had I not had such pressure, such expectations, such demands? What would I be like? It's an interesting question. You know, people sometimes say, maybe half of my life, I lived a life not for me, I lived for someone else. You know, part of healing in any system is trying to live for yourself, not to live for someone else. You know, there's that scene in Amadeus with Mozart, the great genius Mozart, of course, brilliant, born with such genius, and yet his whole life he's haunted by his father. You have this portrait of his foreboding father, and always he would look at this father like, you know, am I pleasing him? Am I living up to his expectations? Now, Mozart was a genius. He achieved quite a few things. But remember, everyone has a child in them that still wants parental approval, parental affection. And we can't even estimate how much power that wields in our lives. Now, sometimes it has a positive element, but it could also have a negative. So God is saying to Abraham, this is the first story in the Torah that talks about, he's 75 years old. This 75 years, this great Avram Avinu did a lot of things in his life. He discovered God. He dealt with the challenges of Nimrod and the pagan society in which he lived. He stood up against them. Yet, the key thing the Torah, the written Torah, wants to tell us is the secret of Abraham's journey. And it's interesting, it wasn't just you going to the promised land. You can't go to the promised land unless you do Lech Lecha. Because you may be there and not be there, if you know what I'm saying. Like sometimes you may be in a space and not even appreciate where you are. Jacob later has an experience like that. He falls asleep on the Temple Mount and suddenly wakes up and realizes, I didn't know where I was. We all have experiences. You could be amidst greatness and not have a clue. Because it's not about geography. It's not about being physically present. It's about being spiritually present. You know, I remember years ago, there was a couple, they were dating. They used to come to this class. And everyone who met them saw this was like a match made in heaven. But then they grew apart. Each decided it's not for them. This one, the guy built a business. The woman started a new job. And they grew apart. A number of years ago, I met them. You know something? Now married with a few children. You know, I told them, as well as others, that they're meant for each other. But they decided no. Why? Because they were completely distracted by sideshows, by smoke screens, by things that didn't matter as much. It's very nice to have a job. But you know, finding your soulmate and building a home and family is eternal. It's forever. And but their priorities were out of place. So they were there. God sent them to each other, and they didn't even know the gift they had. In their case, it's a happy ending. They reunited when he lost his business and she lost her job. So after they lost everything, they suddenly realized what matters. I wonder sometimes how many of us have prayed and asked for something in our lives, and God sent it to you, but you didn't even have the wisdom to understand it's right there. So people ask me always, why come my prayers are not fulfilled? I ask, why has God not listened? And the first question you have to ask, not to be critical of anyone, sensitively, is say, maybe God did send you your answer. Maybe you just didn't, you decided it's not the shape or form, you like it. You may ask for God for something, and God sends you what He thinks you need, not what you think you need. So you want God to help you, but you want it to be on your terms. And maybe He's giving you really the thing you really need. Another concept in Judaism is not just having your eyes open and being humble and realizing that sometimes you're getting exactly what you need, not what you think you need. That sometimes you also have what they call a keli. You need to have God blesses you in everything that you do. So that's interpreted that you need to do something. You need to create a container. God can bless you, for example. You ask for wealth. And suddenly wealth is coming your way, but you know what? You have no pockets. You have no baskets. You have no business. So all the wealth channels are open, but you've done nothing to contain it. It would be like water, like a rain, raining on your fields, but you didn't plant anything. So great, you'll have a wet field, but you didn't plant seeds. This is a two-way street. It's a partnership. So it's important to ask the question, not just one, whether my prayers are fulfilled and what can I accomplish my goals. What have you done? And you must have an objective party helping you there. I deal with this so often. People ask me that they try everything I've dated. I tried JDate and this date and that date. I don't know all the names of the dating sites. Anybody here can help? There's a lot of them. Match.com. Okay. But are you an expert or something? Are you you're an expert?
I've been on some dates.
Okay, yeah. Okay. These sites, okay. And then people ask you, okay, well, I've done everything I can do. There must be some curse, some ayin hara, some evil eye. I've heard this a number of times. And I always, going through the motions, I say, okay, how do you know you did everything? Maybe there's some more things you could do. Trust me, I did everything. I know my life. I did everything. And the more I hear how adamant they are, the more I'm convinced they didn't do everything, because how can you decide that you did everything? You're not objective. You think you did everything. Maybe the thing, the most important thing, you don't even want to do because you're not ready to do it. So before we go to Ayin Haras and curses and all kinds of supernatural and superstitious things, we go through the usual suspects. And I can't tell you how much resistance you hear from people who refuse to do that. They refuse to acknowledge that there may be something they didn't do. Always some other one that they blame. The guys are not this one's that. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's always only one person, because it takes two to tango. But to not be able to look at yourself is the first sign of a person who's trapped and not lech lecha. And they could dream all day about finding a soulmate, and God may have even sent them the soulmate, frankly, and they couldn't even see it. Because they're trapped in their atzacha maladtucha beis avicha, their own inherent blind spots, their parental influences that whatever is hijacking them, and social and peer pressure, what others will say. Ma yemru habriyas. The opening of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, begins with an interesting line. It says, Shavisi Hashem lanegdisam, but then it says, Al yevash mipnei hamaligim. An interesting opening, you know what that means? Do not be embarrassed for those that mock you. Those that mock, that laugh. Maligim. Why do you have to open a whole Shulchan Aruch? Because that's like the foundation of everything. As soon as you're afraid of being accepted or rejected, of social acceptance, you immediately cannot really serve God. Then you're serving people. You're then an idol worshiper. You're serving other people's interests. The true servant of God is avodei atem v'lei avodim la'avodim. You're a servant. You're my servants. You're not servants to my servants. It's a tremendous statement when God says, when he speaks about why a person should, God forbid, not sell themselves into slavery for whatever, to pay their debt or whatever it is. You're my servants. You're not the servants of my servants. You worship a God. You don't worship other human beings. Mordechai would not bow, not to humans and not to anything that's man-made. But we bow to the golden idol all the time. It can take the shape of money, the shape of people with money, and power and influence. I don't think I need to make a case for that. Everybody sees it every day. How people worship either other people or their power and their resource and their assets. What Judaism always taught was there's only one God, and do not be afraid of others. It's a big statement, and it's not so easy to overcome because we are affected by our peers and so on. That's why the first mitzvah ever stated in the Torah to the first Jew is lech lecha ma'atzach malatecha beis avicha. Not educate your children, not give charity, not even pruruvu. Pruruvu means to multiply and have children, which was said earlier twice in Bereshis and Noach. Abraham was not just going to bear children, but he was going to change the world. You want to change the world, you can't be influenced by the world. Because as Einstein and other scientists have made clear, you cannot change a system from within a system. You can never solve a problem from the same system that created the problem. So you're going to serve human beings and worship them and then think you're going to change them? It's impossible. You have to be outside of it. So God says to Abraham, you want to find yourself? You want to find the promised land? You want to find the promised land within you? You need to free yourself from these forces. And when you do that, then you become an independent individual. You become free of those influences. Then you can discover yourself, and you have the courage and the fearlessness to achieve anything you want to achieve, because you're not worshiping the system or the creatures within the system. It's an interesting statement. When you think about it, Mordechai not bowing to Haman, I could see a lot of Jewish people in the corporate offices of Mordechai and Haman and Achashverosh saying, what do you have to rock the boat? The boss says we should all bow to this guy. Big thing, we bow to him. Why do you have to mess up the whole corporate culture here? We're Jews. They finally let us into this firm, into this industry. But it wasn't a small matter, because bowing means essentially you lose yourself. You now have become essentially a servant of the one you bow to. And this was what Jews always did, and it infuriated anyone that didn't like it. They refused to buckle and bow to the structures and systems that existed. Chatose ani maskir, as they say, confess one's own iniquities. So I happened to read Mein Kampf. If you don't know what it is, it's even better. But it was written by, may his name be erased, Hitler. Yeah, he wrote Mein Kampf in German, means in Yiddish as well, it means my battle. And where he writes about his virulent anti-Semitism. And he says, interestingly, just like Haman, he says almost the same words. Haman comes to Achashverosh and says to him that Yeshna Am Echad, in your empire of 127 nations, Yeshna Am Echad is this one nation. Mefuzur mefeded by Beina Amim. They're spread out and all over between the nations, between all the people that you have, all the populations. V'daseim shenis mekolam, and their faith, their religion is different than everybody. They stand out. They're here within us, but they are always outside of us. They're always beyond us. Hitler, just like Haman, said exactly the same thing. He says, I'm sitting in Vienna, Austria, and I look at, what is this Jew? What is this Jew walking in the streets of Vienna? The same thing. Is he among us? Is he one of us? Is he not one of us? And then goes on to his whole attack on Jews, that this is a disease, etc., that's among us, but is outside of us. And interesting, our enemies make us wise. These enemies tell us exactly, what they said is exactly the virtue of what Jews are. They're not of the system. Why? Because they were sent here to change the system. And you can't change the system if you're part of the system. You know? If you're part of the problem, how are you going to change the problem? How are you going to fix the problem? But this requires a lot of courage and a lot of pride and dignity to feel, I am me, and I'm going to do what I have to do, and not allow yourself to bow. That's why it's sad to see when you see people who have that ability to change something, and then they become part of the problem or they become part of the structure. This is what Abraham pioneered. And it took him 75 years to get to this point. Why didn't God say to him, Lech Lecha, when he was 20, 30 years old? It's easier to travel then, especially spiritually. And we know that the Talmud says that he already recognized God. It says Ben Shlo. There are three, four opinions. Some say when he was 3 years old he recognized God. Some say when he was 22. Some say when he was 52. Some say 70. I believe those are the ages. So the people already have commented that obviously it's not a contradiction. You can have a machlekes and metzias. It's not like you can have an argument in the facts. That it was different stages of faith in God. Obviously at age 3 is different than at age 22. So different levels of epiphanies, levels of revelation that he came to. And yet all of it was before Lech Lecha. Why? Because it took a lot of work for him to get to the stage where God can say to him, now, you want to be a real pioneer, a real revolutionary, you want to change the world, leave your homeland and leave your birthplace and leave your parents' home. And the same message is said to each of us. Remember, the Torah is not a book of history that's talking about events that happened back then. When you read it now, it's meant as if it's spoken to you, as if it's happening right now. So think of your Abraham, or you have an Abraham within you, and you're being told, Lech lecha ma'artzecha meladtecha beis avicha. The best piece of advice you'll ever hear. You want to grow, you want to truly find something different, you need to do something about it. You can't be a product of yesterday and create a new tomorrow, because then it's just an extension of yesterday. You can't be part of a system and be influenced by the system and think you're going to change the system. It doesn't work that way. You need to free yourself of these influences. Now, this doesn't mean we have a mitzvah of kibbud av v'em, right? And obviously, in the case of Abraham, he was leaving an idolatrous city and a home. Terach was an idol manufacturer. But this is equally being told to everyone. We all have to cut the umbilical cord. You're born in 9 months, you spend in your mother's womb, and then comes birth. And the early years of our lives were nurtured by our parents, hopefully. And then comes a point where you have to lech lecha ma'artzecha, you have to leave your parents' home. That's the way it's supposed to be. And healthy parents want that to happen. They want a child like a bird to go out and fly on your own, and not just be another lackey or some type of extension of your parents. Even if it's the best parents on earth. You're now an independent individual. The Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, when he got married, so his in-laws had relatively a few dollars or a few rubles or whatever you called it then. So his mother-in-law said to him, we'll support you, stay here. Those days there was no fax, there was no wiring money, there was none of that. So if you lived with your in-laws, they supported you if they were able to. But to go somewhere else, how they couldn't transfer money. So they told him, you live here, he said, the mother-in-law, and we'll support you. You can do whatever you want. We're not going to control you. We will, not like it is today where money controls, is often used to control children. You can learn, you can study, you can do whatever it is that you have to do. And he answered her very interestingly. He was somewhat of a sense of humor. He said to her, it's a very appealing offer. However, even a better offer would be, even more comfortable would be if I went back to my mother's womb. Because when you go back to your mother's womb, there you don't have to worry about food, you don't have to worry about oxygen, you don't have to worry about illness. You're part of your mother does everything for you. It's far more comfortable than living on your own. And then the Alter Rebbe smiled and said to her, however, there's one small problem. It's very comfortable and very nice, very warm and nurturing. The problem is the space has gotten too small and the child has gotten too large. That's the problem. She understood what that meant. It meant that it's very nice to be supported. He chose to go on his own because it's a certain element of independence, whatever the reason was. I'm not going to, everybody makes their judgment calls. But the point is the child has gotten too large and the space has gotten too small. And the way we're created, each of us has an independent spirit. It may be influenced by our parents. We have our parents' genes. We can continue the legacy that they began. But we all have to make a mark that is beyond what our parents made. I've shared the Baal Shem Tov's line, the beautiful Torah. We say every day in the Amidah, we say, Elokeinu, Elokei Aviseinu, Elokei Avram, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov. So he asked a very simple question. Chronological order is the other way around. First it was Elokei Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Right? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then it was Elokei Aviseinu, the God of our parents. And then Elokeinu, then it became our God. That's the order in the generational, chronological order. And his answer is I love this answer. Baal Shem Tov doesn't need me to love his answer, but still love it. It's such a profound and simple answer, and it carries the secret to so many things. He says, in the chronological, the educational order, you educate a child. Obviously, a parent teaches a child first about God, about faith, about Torah, about mitzvahs. But then when a child becomes an adult, it's not enough to worship the God of your parents. You're not worshiping Elokei Aviseinu. It's Elokeinu. You have to own your faith. Is God your God, or you're just doing what you're just speaking to the God that your parents spoke to? So you begin Elokeinu. The most important thing is to know this is my God, our God. Then you say, it is also the God of my parents, and also the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is true chinuch, true education. You teach your children the best value systems, the best approach to life, faith and everything. But then the greatest pride for a healthy adult, a parent, is to see a child own, even struggle, but come to own and say, you know what, this is now mine. Not just I'm doing it because you want me to do it or because you gave it to me, but because I myself want to have it. Even when you're not around, even if you're not disappointed, even if you don't have any expectations, I still want it for myself. So one of the greatest challenges in our generation, that Judaism should be owned by people, and not just out of a guilt or out of responsibility or out of being afraid of disappointing or hurting someone. It's about Elokeinu, to truly integrate, internalize. And it's really the secret for everything in life. You really want to convey something to someone, you want them to internalize it till the point that they own it. Now, just to give an example, in case you need a Talmudic so-called example, there's an interesting law in the Torah. It's about honor. There's certain people we're supposed to honor. One of them is a melech, a king. A king is supposed to be honored. By the way, even a non-Jewish king. Why? Because in some way God gave him leadership, so there's a certain respect you have to offer that. Now, if he's a benevolent king and he's also helpful, then for sure. Another person is supposed to honor, of course, our parents. And then there's honoring our teachers, scholars. When a Talmid Chacham walks into a room, you rise, not because he's a great guy, because he has within him Torah. Same thing with the king. It's not worship. We're not honoring the people. We're honoring the gift that God gave them. Since I'm mentioning all the honors, I might as well mention another one, which is the same idea. It says, Rebbe Mechabed Ashirim. Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. He would honor the wealthy, which immediately all the commentaries jump on that. What is that? You know, the people who are superficial, who love money, of course they honor the wealthy. But I just mentioned before, we don't worship anything. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, he's honoring the wealthy. What exactly makes them special? But money meant something to him. And the answer given, one of the best answers, is not honoring the wealthy. It's honoring that God trusted them with wealth. That means God entrusted them to use the wealth in a wise way. So honoring someone that has a special opportunity, a special gift. So it's not them as people, but as them as someone that God is trusting as his ambassadors to spread the wealth, to give charity, to know how to use the wealth in a wise way. Which of course would imply that if they were obnoxious, selfish, wealthy, maybe you wouldn't honor them so much. Or you honor them in the hope that they will be that way. But I want to go back to the king and the teacher. So it's an interesting law. The question is, what happens if a melech, a king, or a scholar, Talmid Chacham, forgoes on his honor? It's one thing, they come into a room, or in other ways you have to honor them. Not worship them, honor them, because of the God-given gift that they have. Okay. What happens if the melech says to you, I don't mind if you don't stand up, I don't mind if you don't honor me, if you treat me like everyone else. Or the Talmid Chacham says that, Melech shamachal al kveide. A king forgoes, he's machal, he forgives, he doesn't matter, it doesn't bother him if you don't honor him. So it's an interesting distinction. It says, a melech shamachal al kveide, a king that forgoes his own honor, ein kveide machal, he cannot do that. Because it's not his to forgive. It's God's, it's a representative, malchusa d'arke and malchusa d'arki. He's representing, God chose him to be king. He cannot forgive. Talmid Chacham, it says, a scholar, that forgoes, it says, kveide machal. He can forgo his covet. You know why the Talmud says? Because the Torah, which is why we're honoring him, has become his. He owns it. And because he owns it, Teirasa Dilehu, becomes he owns it. So since he owns it, he can also forgo. He could say, I'm fine. Because there's some things that we're supposed to own, and there's some things that are not ours. When it comes to, like I said before, with faith, with Elokeinu, our children owning it. And what Abraham finally achieved when he was 75 years old was the ability to own his faith, and it wouldn't just be a product of what came before him. This is a great, great achievement. Now, of course, once Abraham paved the way, it made it a lot easier for all of us to forever be able to own our choices. So to go back to the initial point that I made at the beginning, the secret, the greatest step ever taken in history is the first step that Abraham took when God said to him, Lech lecha ma'artzecha. Because what he did was, he for himself and opened up the door, pioneered the way, paved the way for all those that would come afterwards, the ability to transcend our own subjectivity, the three levels. Artzecha, maladtecha, beis avicha. Inherent subjectivity, parental influences, and peer social pressure. The three forces that block us from really being able to find our true selves. And each of us has a destiny, each of us has a promised land to reach, but you cannot reach it if you have things that are blocking you. I've always felt, I made it my mission maybe in a way, I always liked that, I'm very touched by the idea to help somebody clear the paths that they can access their own inner strengths and really be themselves and achieve excellence in that regard. I find that to be one of the greatest gifts you can give somebody, is to help them get to that place. Because then they live up to the potential for which they were created. Imagine one day, after 120 years, you come up to heaven and you're asked, so what did you accomplish with your life? And you give a whole list of accomplishments. But then you ask the question, but what did your unique voice. What did you uniquely contribute? And you don't want to end up saying, I don't even know what made me unique, frankly. I did what I was told. Or I knew what I was unique, but I never lived up to it. Each of us has something unique to contribute. They say this is, I don't know if this is an urban legend or not. I mean, Thoreau writes, classic line he writes, most men lead lives of quiet desperation. And then, for some reason, the word got around that the second half of that statement, which is from Walden, is, and they die with their song still inside them. So I did a Google search, and I found these are two different statements from two different authors. For some reason, they were combined together. But frankly, since all these people are human anyway, who cares? You might as well mix the two together. And I think it's an unbelievable line. Most men lead lives of quiet desperation. Sometimes it's not so quiet. Quiet desperation means a certain resignation. You know, what am I going to achieve already in my life? I'd be happy if I just come out as unscathed. You know, when you're younger, you have dreams. You're going to reach who knows what. You get a little older, and some people tell me, you know what? If I go out the way I came in, I'll be happy. Which, of course, is not the language of a business person. That's called a loss. You know, because time passed, and time is worth something. To put in $1 million and come out with $1 million 30 years later is a loss, not a gain. Definitely not a gain. It's a loss. Zoven tagr ikra is an expression that, you know, that if you just sell and don't make any profit. Same thing is psychologically, emotionally. So it saddens me to hear when someone says, you know, I'll be happy if I don't get wounded. I won't get hurt today. That's the level of expectation. We were coming a few weeks ago with Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah. So Shmini Atzeres, we pray for the rain season, Geshem. Like we do Pesach, we do for the dew. So, Tal. So there's an expression there we say, L'chaim v'loy l'movus. So a question is asked, L'chaim v'loy l'movus means to life and not to death. It's redundant. If it's not to death, life is the opposite of death. So if you say not to life, so loy l'movus, it should be not to death. It's the equivalent of saying to life. So I heard once, Rab Levi, because the Rebbe's father, he interpreted like this: you could be not dead, but you could also be not alive. You know, there are people that are biologically alive, but they're like zombies. They feel like they say, I feel dead today. You know, I feel empty. Judaism expects from us not just to be not dead. Life is not just the absence of death. Just like peace is not just the absence of war, and love is not the absence of hate. You know, unfortunately, I have a couple I was counseling, and I asked, so do you love him? No, but I don't hate him. So the guy says, you know, that's already an achievement. That's like maybe so not hate has become the standard for love. It's not love. Love is not the absence of hate. Love is a whole identity. Shalom, peace, is not the absence of war. Shalom is being complete. Shalom also means to be complete. It's a state of its own. And just like life is not just the absence of death. You can be alive and you can be alive. Live, you can be physically alive, you breathe. But there are people breathing, God forbid, and lying like vegetables in hospitals. There are people breathing and walking the streets and they feel soulless. They feel empty. They feel aimless. So to be alive is far more than just not to be dead. And the same thing is in the context of finding yourself. It's not just about, okay, you know what, at least I won't get bombed today, I won't be hurt. It's actually going away at the end of the day and saying I achieved something more than when I came in this morning. And this is the gift that we were given. Each of us has an absolutely unique soul. Yes, we carry the genes of the past, we carry the legacy, the heritage of our parents and grandparents, and we continue that, but with some addition. There has to be something that you've added. It's not just a continuation, just a repeat of the past. Because God would not have sent you here if you have nothing to contribute. And yet, so often we become clones. You know, I've always mentioned this. My son came home from school. He was a kid. He got so excited. It made me excited. Today he doesn't even remember it, but I remember it, you know. And he came home. I said, what are you so excited? He says, I heard today a very nice thing. What was it? You were born an original. Don't become a copy. You know, maybe it's a bumper sticker, a cliche, but it happens to be a good statement. You were born an original. Don't become a copy. because each of us has something that's original. The problem is life wears us down, weakens our resolve, and sometimes doesn't even let us see what makes us special. So surround yourself with people that value your own preciousness, your uniqueness, and do everything possible to actualize it. Lech lecha is the secret how to do it. You have to somewhat weaken the hold of your own subjectivity, your own biases, your own prejudices, your own fears, whatever blind spots, the parental influences that sometimes stunt us, stifle us, and social pressures, peer pressure. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had the privilege to meet someone that's a real person, just an independent spirit. They just march to their own, beat to their own drum. And that's not necessarily pronounced or dramatic. They just have that confidence. And it exudes from them, a confidence, a security. Around people like that, it's very pleasant to be around people like that, always. Because they're comfortable in their own skin, and everyone around them will be comfortable in their own skin. You go to a party, and you know the hosts are tense. Even if you don't see them, you can feel the tension in the air. Because these things are all contagious. There was this analogy they give of this guy who's studying paratrooping. He wanted to become a paratrooper. You know, a guy that jumps out of planes with a parachute in the military. Anyway, so what do? You go up in the plane, you train by watching others. You see how they pack the thing, how they jump. There's a whole technique. And you also build up courage by seeing others. So finally, this guy, a month passes, his training has ended. The sergeant tells him, okay, my friend, get in line. The plane is up there, 30,000 feet up in the air. And your turn. So he packs up, he's all excited. And people, the veterans and the experienced ones are jumping. He comes to the thing, he's ready to, he looks down, oh, no, I'm not jumping so fast. He's afraid of heights or whatever. And he runs back. Okay, we've had that too. Takes another month of training. Fine. To develop even more courage. Another month passes, and the guy says to him, time has come. Okay, he's all all enthusiastic. Same thing. He looks down, looks out the hatch, forget about it. I'm not jumping. Okay, so the sergeant says, listen, clearly this type of, this position is not for you. This requires a certain type of, courage. Find yourself another position in the military. You can work in the army, in the navy, and some other role. No, I really love it here. I've been here for a few months, and I really like the people and so on. She says to him, but I'll help out, I'll help pack them up, I'll help do the administration, whatever you need, I'll help. She said, but you're never going to jump. Why do you want to be here? He says, I may never jump, but I like to be around people who jump. That was his answer. Because there's something about being around courageous people that feels very good. When the shooting starts, of course, you run behind the tree and you hide. But, you read The Red Badge of Courage. Philip Crane that wrote it? Where this guy goes into the Civil War, and he's all this, and basically every battle that breaks out, he finds somewhere to hide in a hole and doesn't fight any battles. But when the battle is over, he's back there with everybody. Oh, wow, that was something. And he lives with this hidden secret, this red badge of courage, which means actually no courage. He was just a wimp. But he made believe like he was part of it. So every time a battle broke out, everybody went to battle, and he ran somewhere away. And then when it was finished, he's a hero. He's coming, yeah. It's this whole story of how he finds redemption in his own. He goes back after the war, and his whole life is just filled with shame. Because he knows in his heart, forget about what anybody else knows, even if no one knew, he knew that he was just a plain coward and was never faced one challenge, one battle. So you can imagine what kind of life he lived. I don't even remember the end of the story. Have you read it? It's one of these classics you read in high school. Red Badge of Courage. Am I the only one who knows this book? Okay, one literate person in this room. Fine. It's a joke. Oscar Wilde already told us that it's not like today there's a lower rate of illiteracy. It's only that illiterate people today know how to read. That's the difference. It's a pretty stinging statement. Okay, so knowing how to read doesn't make you literate. It just means you know how to read. But anyway, the point I'm making here is that it's tremendous to be able to have courage and to see people with courage. Because these are the people who have the confidence. They're comfortable in their own skin. They're not always looking over their shoulder what others are thinking. And they actually have the power to make a difference. What I'm here to tell you is all of you are children of Avraham Avinu. And just like Abraham was told, Lech Lecha, you have the power to do a Lech Lecha. Doesn't matter what happened till now. The past is the past. We all have the power to do something, to a forward thrust. But it's not about, as I said, the destination as much as it is about getting rid of the fears, the resistance, the things that hang, the baggage that weighs us down. So I want to wish upon everyone this week of Lech Lecha, a new opening, a new journey, that each of you, each of us can embark upon and make our original Abraham proud. And that, not Neil Armstrong's first step on the moon, but Abraham's first step of Lech Lecha is really the one that is the great leap for mankind, because he gave us a path, a method of how one embarks on a journey. So the first step is to look at what is weighing you down, what is blocking you, and not be afraid to look at that. So everyone should have a very Lech Lecha Dika type of week. We're here every Wednesday, and I want to again invite, if those of you that have not left your email address, please give it to me. We send out a weekly email. I'd like to get yours. And until next Wednesday, everyone have a very good week. Philip will be giving his class next week. And if any way that we could be of help, I could be of help to you in your journey, your Lech Lecha journey, please don't hesitate to call. And I want to acknowledge the alumni, Shia and Rezi. But take a bow. Yes, they're graduates. They just come back for refresher lessons. And everyone have a very pleasant and good week. Thank you very much. Yeah, stop streaming. Did everything go smooth? Okay. I don't remember.
Oh, no,
I think he finds his card. I don't remember something.
Oh, okay. No, I know the book. Maybe I cheated. I read the clip notes.
Yeah.
Shame on me.
I don't know if it worked.
No, I remember.